You should sit down and stop making things difficult. At your age, people already worry about you. Those were the first words my daughter-in-law said to me on my son's wedding day. Not congratulations, not thank you, not welcome to the family. I didn't answer. I reached for my chair in the front row instead, and my hand stuck. At first, my brain refused to understand what my skin already knew. The back of my palm was glued to the chair, not damp, not tacky, locked, super glue. The room tilted as if I had missed a step on a staircase. I pulled back slowly, the skin resisting just enough to confirm the truth. Someone had done this on purpose. Behind me, the guests were settling in. The string quartet was tuning. My son was about to walk down the aisle, and my chair, the one marked mother of the groom, had been turned into a trap. I looked up. My daughter-in-law stood a few feet away, phone in her hand, eyes already on me. She smiled, not warmly, not nervously. She smiled like someone waiting for a show. That was when I understood something far worse than the glue. This was not a prank. This was a test. If I sat down and panicked, she would have proof. If I caused a scene, she would have leverage. If I looked confused or emotional, she would finally be able to say what she had been hinting at for months, that I was no longer capable of managing my own life. If you are watching, subscribe. This story is inspired by real situations and shared experiences. With a few details adjusted for privacy and clarity, the visuals you see are AI generated to help you feel the moment. If this hits close to home, leave a comment and tell me you are here. Now let me tell you why that chair mattered. Add this block right after that sentence before I go back. I need you to understand one small detail. That chair was not the only thing that felt wrong that morning. When I arrived, my place card was already printed, mother of the groom, front row, but the seating chart had been adjusted just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, enough for someone to create a problem and then claim it was an accident. I remember thinking, who changes a seating chart after it is finalised? Cara told me later that someone had asked to step into the ballroom early, just to check decor. That is the kind of sentence that sounds harmless until you are the one being targeted. So, yes, the glue shocked me, but the setup did not start with the glue. It started with little permissions, little access, little chances to say, I was only trying to help. And that is exactly how control sneaks in. I was 62 years old that morning, a widow, 9 years without my husband, 41 years of marriage reduced to a box of papers, and a quiet house I worked hard to keep. I paid off that house myself. I managed my savings carefully. I lived modestly, not because I had to, but because I chose to. And that made my daughter-in-law uncomfortable. Sienna liked things fast, bigger, more impressive. She had a gentle way of speaking that made every insult sound like concern. You should simplify things. That house is a lot for one woman. Have you thought about putting it in Ethan's name someday? She never said, give it to us. She never said you owe us. She just planted the idea. Over and over. A week before the wedding, she and my son brought me papers. They said it was about covering final wedding costs. Just a formality, nothing serious. Yellow sticky notes marked where I should sign. I smiled and said I would read them at home. That was the first time her smile slipped. Later that night, my lawyer called me back. Maggie, she said, these papers would tie your property to their finances. Do not sign anything. I slept poorly after that. So when my hand stuck to that chair, I knew exactly what was happening. If she could humiliate me publicly, she could paint me as unstable. If she could paint me as unstable, those papers would come back, and this time they would not ask so nicely. The house, my savings, my independence, gone. Someone behind me whispered, "Mum." My son's voice was full of concern. The officiant glanced at his watch. This was the moment women like me are expected to swallow everything and smile. Instead, I stepped back, not dramatically, not loudly, just one calm step away from the chair. I turned my head and caught the eye of the wedding planner. Her name was Kara, efficient, sharp, the kind of woman who notices everything. "Kara," I said softly, "please." She approached, crouched slightly, and touched the back of the chair. Her fingers snapped away instantly. Her face changed. "Oh no," she whispered. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't doubt me. Sienna's smile disappeared so fast it was like someone had turned off a light. Across the room, her fingers tightened around her phone lowered just a little. The music still had not started. But something else had. A shift. For the first time that morning, she wasn't watching me to be entertained. She was watching to see if she had gone too far. Kara leaned in close. "Give me 1 minute," she said. As she walked away, I felt something settle in my chest. Not fear, not anger, clarity. This was not the first time Sienna had tried to control a situation. It was simply the first time she tried to do it in public. I folded my hands, lifted my chin, and waited. I could feel eyes on me. I could feel judgment hovering. But I also felt something new. I was done being managed, done being spoken to like a problem waiting to happen. And as I stood there, watching my daughter-in-law realize that her plan was unraveling, one question kept repeating in my mind. When someone tries to strip you of your dignity to gain control over your life, do you sit down and accept it, or do you stand your ground even if it means the truth is about to come out in front of everyone? I stood there while Kara walked away, and for the first time that day, I let myself breathe, not deeply, not dramatically, just enough to stay steady. People think moments like this are loud. They are not. They are quiet, uncomfortable, full of people pretending not to stare while staring anyway. I could feel the eyes behind me, curious, judging, some sympathetic, some annoyed. The front row always feels like a stage. Even when nothing goes wrong, I kept my hands folded in front of me, fingers gently laced, the way my mother taught me when I was a girl. Posture matters, composure matters, especially when someone is waiting for you to lose it. I didn't look at Sienna again. I didn't need to. I had seen that smile before, not just today. It was the same smile she wore the first time she came into my kitchen and casually asked how much my house was worth. The same smile she wore when she said, "You should really simplify things, Maggie." The same smile she wore when she talked about my life like it was already a problem to solve. I had told myself I was imagining it, that I was being sensitive, that this was just what modern families were like. Women my age are very good at explaining away discomfort. We call it being reasonable or being flexible or keeping the peace. But discomfort is often the first signal. A few hours earlier that morning, I had been standing in my bathroom adjusting my earrings, looking at my reflection and reminding myself that this day was about my son. Ethan had waited a long time for this. He loved deeply. He trusted easily. I had raised him to see the best in people, and now, standing in that ballroom, I wondered if I had taught him that lesson too well. When Sienna entered our lives, she was charming. She remembered birthdays. She brought wine. She called me Maggie instead of Mrs. Anything. I liked her. I really did. But over time, Little things began to stack up. She asked questions that felt too personal for someone who barely knew me. She commented on my finances as if they were shared information. She spoke about my home like it was temporary. That house is so big. You must get tired of managing it all alone. Wouldn't it be easier if everything was just under one roof someday? She never said which roof. She never had to. The week before the wedding, she and Ethan came over with papers. We were sitting at my dining table, the same table my husband refinished years ago when his hands still worked properly. She placed a neat stack in front of me, smiled, said it was nothing serious, just a formality, just something to help with the final wedding costs. You know how expensive things get. Yellow sticky notes marked where I should sign. I remember the sound of the paper when I slid it toward myself. The quiet in the room as I read the first page. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to know it was not about flowers or catering. So I did what women my age learn to do when something feels off. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I smiled and said I would look at it later. That was the moment Sienna leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. That was the moment her patience thinned. I had ignored that warning. Now, back in the ballroom, waiting while Cara handled the situation, I realized how carefully today had been designed. The timing, the chair, the phone already in Sienna's hand. If I had reacted the way she expected, the story would have written itself. Poor Maggie, confused, overwhelmed, causing a scene at her own son's wedding. And once that story existed, everything else would be easier. The papers, the pressure, the suggestions about what was best for me. Behind me, I heard a soft voice, "Mum, are you okay, Ethan?" I turned just enough to look at him, not enough for anyone else to notice. "I'm fine," I said, and I meant it. He looked relieved, but also uncertain. Sienna had already told him I worried too much, that I overthought things, that I didn't adapt well to change. Change is an easy word to hide control behind. I watched Cara return with a calm expression, clipboard in hand, moving with purpose. She didn't make an announcement. She didn't draw attention. She simply began adjusting things. That is how professionals handle problems. Quietly, Sienna shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her phone lowered another inch. I could feel the tension radiating from her side of the room. Good. Let her feel a fraction of what I'd been feeling for months. As the guests settled again, I thought about how many women I knew who had stories like this. Friends who signed papers they didn't fully understand because they trusted their children. Neighbours who moved out of homes they paid for because it was easier than fighting. Widows who were told they were lucky someone wanted to help manage their affairs. Help is rarely help when it comes with strings. I had promised myself years ago, after my husband passed, that I would not let anyone make decisions for me without my consent. That promise was being tested now. The music still had not started, but it would soon, and whatever happened next would change more than seating arrangements. As I waited, I realised something else. This moment was not just about me and Sienna. It was about what happens when women are expected to shrink as they age, to step aside, to hand things over, to be grateful for whatever treatment they receive. I straightened my shoulders, not out of defiance, out of habit. I had survived grief. I had survived loneliness. I could survive this. Cara caught my eye and gave a small nod, reassuring, a professional. Whatever she had done, it had disrupted the plan, and I could see it in Sienna's face. She was no longer smiling. As I stood there, calm on the outside, alert on the inside, I knew one thing for certain. The chair was only the beginning, and if you are still listening, thank you. If you would like to support this channel, consider subscribing. It helps these stories reach the women who need to hear them. More importantly, I hope you are taking care of yourself today. Drink some water, sit comfortably, and tell me this in the comments. What time is it where you are right now? And what city or country are you listening from? I would love to know who is keeping me company as this story continues. The music finally started, soft, polite, the kind of music meant to calm a room and make people forget whatever almost went wrong. Guests turned their attention forward. The moment passed, at least on the surface. I remained standing until Kara returned and quietly guided me to a different chair. No announcement, no apology, just a smooth adjustment that looked intentional to anyone who was not paying close attention. That mattered. Appearances always matter when someone is trying to rewrite the story about you. I sat down carefully, hands resting in my lap, back straight, breathing steady. From the corner of my eye, I could see Sienna finally slip her phone into her bag. She looked irritated, not relieved. That told me everything. As the ceremony continued, I tried to focus on my son, on his face, on the way his shoulders relaxed when he saw me seated and calm, on the way he smiled when the vows began. But my mind kept replaying the last 7 days, especially that evening at my dining table. I remembered the way Sienna had slid those papers toward me as if she were offering dessert, the way she kept talking while I read, filling the silence so I would not slow down. It was not aggressive, it was practiced. That is something women my age learn to recognize after a lifetime of meetings, marriages, and negotiations. Pressure does not always shout. Sometimes it hums softly until you give in just to make it stop. I had taken the papers home that night and spread them out on my kitchen counter. Under the same light where I once helped Ethan with homework, I read slowly, carefully, and then I did what I had not told anyone yet. I called my lawyer. She had known me for years, through my husband's illness, through the estate planning we did when everything still felt stable. She listened quietly as I explained. Then she sighed. "Maggie," she said, "this is not about wedding costs." Insert right after that line. Then she read me one sentence from page 2, just one, and my stomach dropped. It said that if there were any shared liabilities in the future, my property could be considered part of the picture. Not today, not on paper, in big bold letters, but quietly, through language most people skim past because they trust the person across the table. My lawyer asked me a question that made me sit up straighter. Did anyone tell you to sign quickly? Did anyone put sticky notes where your signature should go? Did anyone say, "It's just a formality"? I told her yes to all of it. She said, "Maggie, that is not kindness, that is a tactic." She explained that the language tied my property to future obligations, that it created expectations without clear limits, that if I signed, disentangling myself later would be difficult, not impossible, but painful. And pain is what people like Sienna count on. That was when I understood why the chair mattered. The glue was not meant to hurt me physically. It was meant to provoke a reaction. If I panicked, cried, or made a scene, she could point and say, "See, she is overwhelmed. She cannot manage stress. She needs help." Help that came with paperwork. As the ceremony reached its quiet moments, I watched Sienna from a distance. She was no longer watching me. She was watching Kara. That was interesting. People who feel in control do not watch the planner. People who are worried do. I noticed small things then. The way Sienna kept adjusting her dress even though it was already perfect. The way she whispered to her mother and then stopped when Ethan glanced over. the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. This was not how a bride behaves when everything is going according to plan. The vows ended. Applause filled the room. Guests stood. I stood with them, steady and composed. If anyone expected me to look shaken, they would have been disappointed. As people moved toward the cocktail area, Cara approached me again. She didn't ask if I was all right. She asked if I wanted water. I appreciated that. She leaned in just slightly, enough to be discreet. Someone tampered with that chair. She said quietly, "We will document it." I nodded. No questions, no drama. That was another thing Sienna had miscalculated. I was not interested in confrontation. I was interested in facts. Facts have a way of surviving longer than accusations. As guests mingled, I found myself standing near the edge of the room, watching conversations happen. Weddings are fascinating that way. People reveal themselves when they think no one important is listening. I heard someone compliment Sienna on how calm she looked. I heard another guest mention how generous I had been, helping with the wedding. Generous. The word lingered. I thought about how often generosity is mistaken for consent, how often women my age are expected to give without asking questions, money, space, authority, all under the name of family. Sienna passed by me then, close enough for me to smell her perfume. She didn't look at me, but she spoke. "I hope you are feeling okay," she said, her voice soft enough to sound sincere to anyone nearby. I met her eyes. "I feel very clear," I said. "That was all." She blinked, just once. Then she walked away. That single moment confirmed something I had suspected for a while. She didn't want harmony. She wanted compliance. Insert after that sentence, right then. An older aunt I barely knew leaned toward me and whispered, "Honey, are you all right?" I smiled and said, "I am perfectly fine." But then she added something that told me Sienna had been talking. She said, "Sienna mentioned you have been under a lot of stress lately." I looked at her and kept my voice gentle. I said, "Thank you for caring. I'm not confused. I'm cautious." The aunt blinked, then nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. Women our age do not need every detail. We recognize the pattern, and clarity was the one thing she could not work around. As the reception continued, I noticed Ethan watching us both, not closely, not suspiciously, but thoughtfully. That gave me hope, because control works best in silence, and silence was slipping. I took a sip of water and allowed myself a small, private smile, not of victory, of readiness. Whatever came next would require patience. It would require timing. And most of all, it would require letting Sienna believe she still had the upper hand, because people make their biggest mistakes when they think they have already won. As the lights dimmed slightly and the room shifted into celebration mode, Cara caught my eye once more. She nodded toward a hallway leading away from the ballroom. "Later." Her eyes seemed to say, "Later." I nodded back, because if Sienna thought the chair incident was over, she was wrong. It was only the opening move. And the question that stayed with me as I watched my daughter-in-law laugh with guests was this: if she was willing to set a trap in public, on the most photographed day of her life, what else had she already done that I had not discovered yet? I didn't follow Cara right away. That was important. People who rush look guilty. People who stay calm look confident. Instead, I stayed where I was, chatting politely with a cousin I barely knew, nodding at compliments about the ceremony, smiling at strangers who told me my son looked handsome. All the while, my mind was working, slowly, carefully. Women my age learn early that survival is not about speed, it is about timing. When the first wave of guests moved toward the bar and the music grew louder, I excused myself quietly and headed toward the hallway Cara had indicated earlier. No one stopped me, no one followed. The hallway was cooler, quieter, the kind of space venues use for storage, staff movement, and things guests are not meant to notice. Cara was waiting there with the venue manager, Mr. Patel. He was calm, professional, and clearly unhappy. We found adhesive residue on the chair. He said, not unkindly, "This is not an accident." I nodded. I had not expected him to sugarcoat it. Cara added that the chair had been cleaned earlier, that no staff member used glue anywhere near the seating area, that someone from the wedding party had access to the room during setup. Facts. Simple, unemotional. That was exactly what I wanted. They asked if I wanted to file an incident report. I said yes, not loudly, not dramatically, just yes. Because here is something women over 50 understand very well. Documentation is power. We sat at a small folding table while Mr. Patel wrote everything down: time, location, condition of the chair. I answered calmly, sticking to what I knew. I didn't speculate. I didn't accuse. That would come later. When he finished, he asked if I needed anything. I said water would be nice, and it sounds small, but moments like that matter. I was not a victim to be managed. I was a person participating in a process. When they stepped away, Cara stayed with me for a moment. "You handled that well," she said. I smiled. I had practice. I replied. She gave a small laugh, the kind that carries understanding. Before we returned to the reception, she told me something else. Security had been asked to keep an eye on the seating area. Quietly, no confrontation, no announcements. Again, professional, back in the ballroom. The mood had shifted. People were laughing, glassware clinked. The worst of the ceremony nerves had passed. That is when people relax. And when people relax, they slip. I took a seat at a table near the edge of the room and simply watched. Sienna was holding court now, laughing loudly, gesturing with her hands, playing the role of radiant bride, but she kept glancing toward me, not often enough to be obvious, often enough to be noticeable. Her mother hovered nearby, speaking in low tones, face tight. I noticed that too. I sipped my water and let my thoughts drift back to the paperwork, the sticky notes, the language my lawyer warned me about. I had brought copies with me, not to show anyone, not yet, just to remind myself that I was not imagining things, that everything connected, the chair, the phone, the papers. Control rarely arrives in one bold bull. It arrives in small steps that seem harmless on their own. I thought about all the women I knew who had been told they were overreacting, who were told to stop being difficult, who were told to trust family. Family should never require blind trust. As the first dance began, Ethan caught my eye across the room. He smiled and gave a small nod. That helped. He didn't know everything, but he knew enough to sense tension, and more importantly, he knew I was not the type to cause trouble for no reason. Sienna noticed the exchange. Her smile tightened. That was the moment I understood something else. She had expected me to shrink, to apologize, to downplay, to smooth things over so the day would not be uncomfortable. Instead, I had done nothing, and nothing is sometimes the most unsettling response of all. The rest of the reception moved along as planned. Toasts were made, plates were cleared, laughter rose and fell. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Underneath, Lines were being drawn. I excused myself once more, this time to use the restroom, and passed near the bridal emergency tote sitting by the wall. It was open, careless. Inside, I saw the usual things: tissues, makeup, safety pins, and something else, a small plastic bottle, clear, unlabeled. I recognized it anyway, the same tiny bottle style sold at every drugstore, checkout. I didn't touch it. I didn't react. I simply noted where it was and continued on my way. Women my age know better than to grab evidence in public. We let professionals do that. When I returned to my seat, my heart was steady, not racing, not fearful, focused. I knew now that the chair was not a random act. It was part of a larger picture, and I knew something else. Sienna was not done. People who take risks like that do not stop when the first attempt fails. They escalate. As the evening went on, I stayed present, smiling when appropriate, speaking when spoken to, always aware of where Sienna was and who she was talking to. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. She was already unraveling. I could see it in the way she watched the staff, in the way she whispered urgently to her mother, in the way she avoided my eyes now. Control feels powerful until it slips. And once it slips, panic follows as the cake was cut and the lights dimmed for dancing. I allowed myself one quiet thought. This was no longer just about me protecting myself. This was about stopping something before it went any further. Because if someone was willing to risk public exposure at their own wedding, the next step would not be smaller. It would be bigger. And as I stood to leave the table and move toward the dance floor, one question settled firmly in my mind. If the chair was only the beginning, what was Sienna planning to do next when she realized silence was no longer working by the time the dancing started? I knew one thing for certain. Sienna was no longer enjoying her own wedding. She smiled when people looked at her. She laughed when someone told a joke. But the moment she thought no one was watching, her face tightened. That kind of tension does not come from nerves. It comes from plans going wrong. I stayed where I could see most of the room without being obvious, near enough to the edge to be forgotten, close enough to observe. That is another thing women my age learn without anyone ever teaching us. When you stop demanding attention, you start seeing everything. I noticed how often Sienna checked the hallway, how she whispered to her mother and then stopped mid-sentence when someone walked by, how her eyes kept flicking toward the staff area where Cara had disappeared earlier. People who feel safe do not watch exits. I also noticed something else. Ethan, he was trying to enjoy himself. He really was. But every so often, his gaze would drift toward me and then back to Sienna, like he was quietly comparing two versions of the same story. That gave me hope. I didn't want to win at the expense of my son. I wanted the truth to surface on its own. The best way to do that is to let people keep talking. At one point, I stepped outside for some air. The night was cool, quiet. I leaned against the railing and let my shoulders drop for the first time that day. I thought about my husband, about how he used to say that people reveal themselves fastest when they think they are smarter than everyone else in the room. I smiled at the memory. Back inside, the reception was in full swing. That was when I saw Cara again. She didn't approach me directly. She simply passed by and placed a folded napkin on the table next to mine. Inside was a short note. We pulled footage from earlier. Not here. Later. My pulse quickened, but my face didn't change. This was it. Whatever Sienna had done was no longer speculation. It was recorded. I folded the napkin carefully and placed it in my purse next to my phone. I didn't look at Sienna. I didn't need to, because the shift happened almost immediately. She grew restless. Her laughter became sharper, her movements quicker. She excused herself from a conversation and walked briskly toward the hallway, only to stop when she saw security standing near the entrance. She turned around and went back to the crowd. I took a sip of water and waited. Minutes passed. Then something happened that told me everything was about to change. Sienna approached me, not directly, not aggressively. She came with a smile and that same soft voice she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "I hope you are enjoying yourself," she said. I met her eyes. "I am," I replied. That was it. No explanation, no reassurance. She lingered, clearly waiting for more. When none came, she tried again. "Today has been a lot," she said. "Emotions run high." "I agree," I said. Still nothing. Her smile faltered. People like Sienna rely on others filling the silence. When you do not, they lose their footing. She nodded stiffly and walked away. I watched her return to her mother. Their conversation was short. "Urgent?" Her mother shook her head. That was interesting. Parents who approve do not shake their heads like that. As the night wore on, small things kept adding up. A staff member quietly removed the chair from earlier and wheeled it away. Security remained visible but unobtrusive. Cara stayed busy but always within sight. And Sienna grew more agitated. I could feel it in the air. That was when I decided to take the next step. Not confrontation, preparation. I slipped into a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. I didn't text my lawyer. It was too late for that. Instead, I opened the folder where I had saved photos of the paperwork from the week before. I scrolled through them slowly, reminding myself of the language, the clauses, the implications. I was not doing this out of fear. I was doing it to stay grounded. Because when someone is trying to undermine you, confidence comes from knowing exactly where you stand. I put the phone away and returned to my seat. Sienna was watching me now, openly. No smile, just calculation. That told me she was running out of options. And people who run out of options make mistakes. As the DJ announced the next dance, Ethan came over and sat beside me for a moment. He didn't ask questions. He simply said, "I am glad you are here." "Mom, so am I," I said, and I meant it more than he knew. That moment mattered. It grounded me, because no matter how this ended, I was not alone. As the night began to wind down, guests started collecting their coats. Hugs were exchanged. Goodbyes said. Sienna stayed near the entrance, watching everyone leave, watching me. I could see the question in her eyes. "What do you know?" I stood up, smoothed my dress, and picked up my purse. As I turned toward the exit, Cara caught my eye one last time. She gave a small nod toward the hallway. "Tomorrow," it seemed to say, or sooner. I walked past Sienna without a word. She didn't stop me, she didn't speak, but her face had lost all colour. And as I stepped out into the cool night air, one thought settled firmly in my mind. If she was this nervous now, just imagining what I might know, what would happen when she realised exactly what had been captured on camera. I slept very little that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind would not stop sorting things into place. By the time the sun came up, I was no longer guessing, I was planning. The morning after the wedding felt strangely quiet. No music, no schedule, just coffee, a clean kitchen, and my purse sitting on the counter exactly where I left it. I like mornings like that. They remind me who I am when no one is watching. I replayed the night in my head slowly. The chair, the phone, the way Cara had nodded, the folded napkin. Most people think the biggest mistake someone like Sienna makes is being cruel. It is not. The biggest mistake is assuming everyone else will react emotionally. By mid-morning, my phone rang. It was Cara. Her voice was calm, professional, the way people sound when they know something important but are choosing their words carefully. She said the venue manager had reviewed the footage with security. She said they documented everything. She said there was no doubt that someone from the wedding party had tampered with the chair. She didn't say a name. She didn't need to. She asked if I was available to stop by later that afternoon. I said yes, not because I was eager, but because I was ready. When I arrived, the venue looked very different without flowers and guests. Bare, honest. Mr. Patel greeted me with a folder in his hands. Inside were still images from the footage, clear enough to tell a story. I didn't need to study them long. There she was, Sienna, bending near the front row, holding a small bottle, glancing over her shoulder before touching the chair. No one else in the frame, no confusion, just intent. I felt something then, but it was not anger. It was relief, because doubt is exhausting. Truth is not. Mr. Patel explained what would happen next. An incident report, liability documentation, a conversation with the appropriate parties. He asked how I wished to proceed. That question mattered. I told him I didn't want a scene. I didn't want accusations shouted across a room. I wanted things handled properly, quietly. He nodded. People like him respect that. On my way out, Cara walked with me to the door. She paused, then said something that surprised me. She told me she had quietly adjusted the seating after the incident, not the chart, just the physical chair. She said it was a precaution, a way to prevent anything else from happening. I smiled, because I understood what that meant. If Sienna believed the chair was still in place, she would keep watching it. And if she kept watching it, she would not notice what was coming next. That afternoon, I did something I had been putting off for too long. I called my lawyer again. This time, I didn't sound worried, I sounded prepared. We went over everything slowly, the paperwork, the possible outcomes, the steps I could take to protect myself. She asked if I wanted to confront my son. I said not yet. Timing matters. That evening, Ethan called me. He sounded tired, confused. He asked if I was okay. I told him the truth. I said I was fine, but that some things from the wedding were being reviewed by the venue. There was a pause. Then he said something that stayed with me. She has been really upset today. He said, about the chair? Interesting. I thanked him for checking in and ended the call. That was when I knew Sienna was unravelling. People who are innocent do not fixate on one object. People who are guilty do. The next day, Cara called again. Most of the out-of-town family was still in town, so Ethan and Sienna hosted a casual farewell brunch before their trip. Cara told me security would be present, just in case. Just in case. I attended the brunch, not out of obligation, but to observe. The room was smaller, more intimate. Sienna was there, early, scanning the setup, eyes darting to the front. I could almost see her mind working. Is it still there? Did she notice? Does she know I took my seat calmly? Not the front row this time, just another chair. I watched Sienna watch the original spot. Nothing happened. No scene. No trap. That confused her. Confusion makes people sloppy. Halfway through brunch, her mother approached me. She looked uncomfortable. She asked if everything was all right. I smiled and said yes. That seemed to unsettle her even more. As people stood to leave, I noticed Sienna hover near the front again. She hesitated. Then she stepped forward and touched the chair herself. Just lightly. Her face changed instantly. It was not sticky anymore. It was clean. Her eyes widened. That was the moment. The exact moment she realized something had shifted, that whatever she had planned was no longer under her control. She looked around quickly, searching faces. Mine met hers. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply held her gaze, long enough for the message to land. You are not in charge anymore. She looked away first. The brunch ended quietly. No arguments, no accusations, but the air was different now, heavy. As I gathered my things, Cara passed by me one last time. She said nothing. She didn't have to, because I knew what came next. If the chair was clean, if the footage was documented, if Sienna now understood she had been seen, then the only question left was not whether the truth would come out. It was how far she would go when she realized the next move was hers to make. After the brunch, things went quiet, too quiet. That is usually when people think the danger has passed. When nothing dramatic happens, they relax. I did not. Silence can be a strategy. The first sign came 2 days later. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I was folding laundry when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. Women my age learn early that urgency is often manufactured. When I listened later, the message was polite, almost cheerful. The caller introduced herself as someone checking in. She said she was calling to make sure I had support. She said there had been a concern raised about my well-being. Concern, that word again. I sat down slowly and listened to the message twice. She didn't accuse. She didn't threaten. She simply asked me to call back. I knew exactly where it came from. Sienna had realized the chair would not work. The footage existed. The venue was involved. So she changed tactics. This time, she went for credibility. I called my lawyer before I called anyone else. She listened calmly and then said something that made me smile. Maggie, she said. This was always going to be the next step. She explained that when people lose control of a situation, they try to change the narrative. They stop attacking the facts and start questioning the person. Confused, vulnerable, in need of help. The old tricks just wear newer clothes. I asked her what to do. She said to document everything, return the call politely, say as little as possible. So I did. When I called back, I was calm, friendly, clear. I answered questions simply. Yes, I lived alone. Yes, I managed my own finances. Yes, I had family support. I didn't explain the wedding. I didn't mention the chair. I didn't need to. Facts do not need a performance. They just need to be written down. After the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, not because I was shaken, because I was angry, not loud anger, focused anger, the kind that sharpens your thinking. I realized then that Sienna was willing to involve strangers to gain leverage over me, and that meant she would be willing to involve my son next. That evening, Ethan came over. He didn't announce it. He just showed up. I could see the conflict in his face. As soon as he walked in, he sat down heavily and ran a hand through his hair. He told me people had been asking questions, that Sienna was upset, that she felt attacked. I listened. I always listen. Then I asked him one simple question. Had she explained why the venue documented an incident at the wedding? He looked surprised. He said she told him there had been a misunderstanding, that I had overreacted. I nodded. That sounded familiar. I asked if he wanted to see something. He hesitated, then said yes. I showed him the paperwork she had asked me to sign, the photos I had saved. Nothing dramatic, just paper, language, facts. I didn't accuse her. I didn't tell him what to think. I let the documents speak. He grew quiet. That silence told me more than any argument could have. He didn't defend her. He didn't dismiss me. He said he needed time. I told him to take it because pressure breaks trust faster than truth. After he left, I locked my door and made tea. I needed the ritual, the warmth, the reminder that I was still in my own home. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, another message came in, this time from Sienna herself. Short, careful. She said she felt hurt. She said she felt misunderstood. She said she wanted to talk. I didn't respond. Not yet. People who want resolution do not send messages like that. They ask questions. They listen. This was positioning. Over the next few days, small things kept happening. A neighbour mentioned someone had asked about me. A distant relative called to check in unexpectedly. A comment slipped out about how stressful the wedding must have been for me. Sienna was working the perimeter, not attacking directly, just planting doubt. I let her, because every move she made left a trail. I documented calls, saved messages, noted dates. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman keeping receipts. Writing things down turns chaos into a timeline, and timelines tell stories that emotions cannot erase. One afternoon, Cara called again. She said the venue had finalised their report. She said there would be consequences, not dramatic ones, but real ones. Accountability has a way of quieting people. As the days passed, I noticed something else. Sienna stopped calling me Maggie. In conversations with others, she referred to me as Ethan's mother. Distance, language shifts when power shifts. I didn't reach out. I didn't defend myself publicly. I didn't correct rumours. That surprises people. But women over 50 know something younger people often do not. You do not chase your reputation. You let it catch up. One evening, as I was closing my curtains, my phone buzzed again. A new message, this one longer, this one less controlled. It asked why I was doing this, why I was making things difficult, why I could not just let things go. I read it once, then again, and I realised something important. Sienna was no longer trying to control the situation. She was trying to stop the outcome. And that meant the truth was closer than ever. I placed my phone face down on the table and took a deep breath, because the next step would not be quiet. It would not be subtle. When people feel cornered, they escalate. And the question I could not ignore anymore was this: what would Sienna do when she realised that everything she had tried so far had only made things worse? The escalation didn't come the way I expected. It didn't arrive as a threat or an apology, or even another concerned phone call. It arrived disguised as reason. 3 days after the last message, Ethan asked if we could talk. Not on the phone, not at my house, somewhere neutral. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes, the kind with chipped mugs and slow service. A place where people talk quietly and mind their own business. I arrived early and chose a seat near the window. When Ethan walked in, I saw it immediately that he was tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long week, the kind that comes from being pulled in two directions. He ordered coffee and sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I let him take the lead. That matters. Finally. He sighed and said that Sienna was struggling, that she felt attacked, that she didn't understand why things had gotten so complicated. I nodded. I didn't argue. Then he said something that changed everything. She says you are trying to turn people against her. He said that you are punishing her for wanting to help. I looked at my son for a long moment. Then I asked him one question. Did she tell you about the chair? He hesitated. That was my answer. I reached into my purse and placed my phone on the table between us, not dramatically, not forcefully, just enough. I opened the folder Kara had sent me. Still images from the footage. Clear. Undeniable. Ethan leaned forward. He didn't touch the phone. He didn't rush. He just stared. I watched his face as understanding settled in, not all at once, but piece by piece. I said nothing. Silence gives truth room to breathe. When he finally looked up, his voice was different, quieter. She told me it was an accident, he said. I nodded. That is why I didn't argue. I replied, I wanted you to see it for yourself. He sat back, rubbing his temples. I could see the internal battle. Love does that to people. It asks them to choose between who they thought someone was and who that person is showing themselves to be. I didn't push. Instead, I told him about the papers, not emotionally, just factually, what they said, what my lawyer explained, why I didn't sign. I told him about the call, checking on my well-being. Again, no accusations, just a timeline. By the time I finished, his coffee had gone untouched. He asked one question. Why would she do this? I answered honestly, I do not think she meant to hurt me. I said, I think she meant to manage me. That landed. We sat there for a while after that. When he finally stood up, he hugged me. Not quickly, not awkwardly, tightly. I need to talk to her, he said. I nodded. I know. What happened next didn't happen in front of me, but I heard about it later. From Ethan, from Kara, from the way Sienna stopped calling altogether. According to Ethan, when he asked her directly about the chair, she denied it at first. Then she minimised it. Then she blamed stress. When he mentioned the footage, she grew angry. Not embarrassed, angry. She accused me of setting her up, of manipulating the venue, of turning him against her. That was the moment, he said, when something clicked, because innocent people do not react that way to evidence. They ask questions. They look for explanations. They do not attack the messenger. The fallout was not loud. There was no shouting match, no dramatic ultimatum, just distance, and distance speaks volumes. A few days later, I received an email from the venue, formal, professional. They confirmed the incident had been resolved and documented. They thanked me for my cooperation. I forwarded it to my lawyer, just in case. That night, as I sat alone in my living room, I felt something unexpected. Relief, not because I had won, but because I no longer had to pretend nothing was wrong. That kind of pretending is exhausting. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. A message from Sienna. This one was different, short, sharp. She said she knew what I was doing. She said I was trying to control the narrative. She said I should think about the consequences. I read it twice. Then I did something I had not done yet. I replied, only one sentence. I am protecting myself. Nothing more. I blocked the number. Women my age are often told blocking is immature. It is not. It is a boundary. The days that followed were quieter. No calls, no messages. Ethan checked in regularly, carefully. We spoke about neutral things, work, weather, life. Trust rebuilds slowly. I was patient because patience had already carried me this far. One afternoon, Kara called one last time. She said security had noticed something interesting during the review process, something they had not mentioned earlier because it was not part of the initial report. She asked if I had a moment. I said, yes, always yes to information. As she began to explain, I felt my stomach tighten, because if what she was about to tell me was true, then the chair had never been the real plan. It had just been the test. And the real problem was something far bigger that Sienna had already set in motion without me knowing. The only question left was this. When I finally learned what else she had tried to do behind my back, would I be ready to confront it head on? Or would it force a decision none of us could walk away from when Cara finished explaining what security had found? I didn't speak right away. I sat there with the phone in my hand, staring at the wall, letting the information settle where it belonged. It turns out the chair was never meant to be the ending. It was the opening. According to their email log, someone had requested a copy of the vendor contact list and the emergency contact sheet. My name was on it, my phone number was on it, and the request didn't come from Cara or the venue staff. They said the sender used a personal email and wrote as if they were part of the wedding party. It was subtle, buried in routine paperwork requests, the kind of thing no one questions unless they are already paying attention. That was when it became clear to me this was not personal cruelty. This was entitlement, and entitlement grows quietly when it is never challenged. I thanked Cara and ended the call. Then I did something simple. I stood up, walked to the window, and opened the curtains. I needed daylight, because fear grows in the dark when you sit with it alone. I wanted to see my own home, the street I knew, the place I had built a life in, because here is the truth. I could have handled that entire situation very differently. I could have yelled, I could have accused, I could have gone to war at the wedding itself, but none of that would have protected me. What protected me was clarity. What protected me was patience. What protected me was refusing to shrink. That is a lesson it took me a long time to learn. For years after my husband died, I told myself that staying agreeable was safer, that being flexible made things easier, that if I didn't make waves, people would treat me fairly. That is not how life works. Respect does not come from silence. It comes from boundaries. Looking back now, I realized something else. At the moment I stepped back from that chair, I was not just avoiding humiliation, I was choosing myself, and that choice changed everything. I want to speak directly to you for a moment. If you are listening to this and thinking you would have handled it differently, that is okay. We all do the best we can with the tools we have at the time. But I want you to ask yourself something. How many times have you felt uncomfortable and told yourself it was nothing? How many times have you signed something you didn't fully understand because you trusted the person asking? How many times have you been told you were overreacting when your instincts were trying to protect you? I have lived long enough to tell you this. Your instincts are not dramatic. They are experienced. They are built from decades of paying attention, and they deserve respect after everything's settled. Ethan and I had many conversations, slow ones, careful ones. We didn't rush to fix things. We allowed space, and in that space, truth had room to exist. Our relationship didn't survive because I won an argument. It survived because I stayed grounded, because I didn't force him to choose sides, because I trusted him to see clearly when the noise faded. That is another lesson I wish I had learned earlier. You do not have to convince people who are willing to listen. You just have to stay consistent. As for Sienna, our relationship changed permanently, not in a dramatic way, in a realistic one. Boundaries replaced access, distance replaced entitlement, and peace replaced anxiety. That is not a failure. That is growth. I want to share a few personal reflections with you now. I learnt that being calm does not mean being weak. I learnt that waiting does not mean giving up. I learnt that documentation is a form of self-respect. I learnt that silence can be a strategy when it is chosen. I learnt that you do not owe anyone access to your life just because they are family. I learnt that protecting yourself does not make you selfish. I learnt that clarity is kinder than chaos. I learnt that my voice does not need to be loud to be effective. Most importantly, I learnt that aging is not a loss of power. It is an accumulation of wisdom. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to say not yet. And you are allowed to say no without explaining yourself. Life does not end at 50 or 60 or 70. In many ways, it begins again, with fewer illusions, with stronger instincts, with a deeper understanding of what truly matters. I now live my days differently. I read paperwork carefully. I ask for time. I listen to discomfort instead of dismissing it. And I sleep better because of it. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to support this channel. Please like this video if it spoke to you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. These stories are not about revenge. They are about clarity. They are about dignity. They are about women learning, sometimes late in life, that their peace is worth protecting. Before you go, I want to leave you with a few questions. What is one boundary you have been avoiding setting? What is one conversation you have been postponing because it feels uncomfortable? What is one small step you could take this week to protect your future self? And finally, how would your life change if you trusted your instincts just a little more? Thank you for listening. Take care of your health. Drink some water. Rest when you need to. And if you feel like it, tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is right now. Your presence matters more than you know. Your voice matters. And your story is not over yet.